Welcome back, friends. The tournament results are in for the previous week, and we got all the stats here for you. We're going to take a look at the winners and losers from the previous week. We'll take a faction-focused deep dive on Tyranids and the Leagues of Votann, and we'll take a look at the overall current state of the meta in this data slate. So sit back, relax, and let's get to it. Quickly before we get started, I'd like to do the old YouTube pleasantries. If you like this video, make sure to give it a like. It really helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps support me, support the channel, and I'll make sure you get all the latest videos when I post them. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. Alright, and first thing we're going to look at this week is the number of players for the week. Last week, it was a very down week. We only had 299 players. There's only 7 tournaments, so it was a very slow week for numbers. And for the data slate, we're sitting at just over 4,000. For the previous week games played, we had just under 1,500, and we're just about at 21,000 for the data slate. And the number of tournaments, like I mentioned previously, was 7, and we're at 66 for the data slate. And the first chart we're going to look at here is the win percentages by armies. Overall, it was a bit of a swingy week. When I say swingy, I mean the numbers were a little bit high and a little bit low due to the low number of players. So a few players doing well or a few players doing poorly can really swing the numbers in one way or the other. But some things to notice here is the Imperial Knights sitting up pretty high, about 60%. Tyranids and Tau both over 55%. We had Death Watch and Templars, but they had a very low player representation. I'll get into those details a little bit later in a different slide. But it was nice to see Tyranids doing well. They've been kind of struggling this data slate, so it's nice to see them finally getting a good win percentage and actually pulling out a tournament win this week, which we'll get into later. Tau had a breakout week as well. They've been down around 50% or less for most of this data slate, and it's nice to see them up about 57% this week. And down the bottom, we're just going to have to start pouring one out for Sisters here, because it's just every week is low 40s or below. They're in a really bad spot. And then you see Votann and Genestealer Cults down there with them. Votann is just another one of those armies. We'll get into the faction focus with them in a little bit, but you know, they're just sitting at the like meh category. This week was particularly bad. They haven't really been that bad, but overall just kind of a meh army. And then in the middle, we've got a lot of armies doing okay. You know, a few armies sitting around 44%, which is a little bit below average, but nothing too crazy for the week. Demons, Space Marines, Orcs all around 55%. So overall, the numbers are decent, but we do have a fewer higher spikes in the 62, 60 range and a few lower down in the low 30s due to the lower player count. But overall, not too bad. Moving on, we're going to take a look at the army representation. So this is the percentage of players playing each army. The average is about 3.7%. So you can see at the top here, we have Chaos Demons, Astra Militarum, and Space Marines. They're all sitting at about 7%. Demons, it's weird to see them up there, top representation, but that's a lot to do with the Legion of Excess. They're getting a lot of tournament wins, and I think it's bringing a lot of players in, dusting off their old Slaanesh models, bringing that detachment to the board. They're definitely seeing a higher rep than normal. Astra Militarum, popular army. Space Marines, popular army. They're always up pretty high. Same as the usual suspects below them. You got Necrons, Blood Angels, and Orcs, all pretty high. Down at the bottom, Death Watch, Black Templar, always, you know, they're fairly low all the time. Black Templars are abysmally low, and we covered them last week, and we saw a lot of, in the comments, you know, people who play them, and people giving their opinion of what's going on, and it's just a general down sentiment for Black Templars this data slate, so hopefully they can do something to sort of lift the players' spirits up a little bit, give them something to look forward to. Votann, Sisters of Battle, also pretty low, and we'll cover Votann in a minute here. But overall, it was kind of a week of very highs and very lows across all statistics. And in the next slide, we'll get a look at how that's all playing out. We're going to skip the XOX1 percentage on its own this week just because the lower player count, the numbers for XOX1 percentage was like very high and very low, and it's kind of hard to grasp what's actually happening. But if we look at the normal chart here, all statistics, win rates, XOX1 percentage, and representation, we can kind of get a good look at what's going on. So at the top, we have Tyranids, we have Tau, and Demons that are kind of like the standoutish ones, and Orcs are kind of in there too, but Tyranids had a good week, 58% win rate, 30% XOX1 percentage, and almost 5% representation. So, you know, they had above average amount of players, and those players were doing pretty well. Same as Tau, just about average representation. So for 300 players, you're looking at probably like 10 players. Half of them went 1 loss or 0 losses. So overall, Tau had a really good showing. And then you have, at the very top, you have Death Watch and you have Black Templars. And you look at Black Templars and it's 60% win rate, but they had a 0 XOX1. They only had one player, and that player went 3-2. So it wouldn't be great to look at them and be like, oh, they only had a 0% XOX1. They really struggled. Well, it doesn't really tell the whole story because they only had one player, so it's not really a good data set. Same as Death Watch. They only had 3 players. 2 of them did really well, but one of them did extremely poorly. So that 66% is a little misleading when you only have 3 people. So that's why I wanted to give just this chart here, which gives a better overall grasp on things. And then you look down at the bottom, Sisters of Battle, 31% win rate, 33% XOX1. Well, that's really high. They only had 3 players. So one player did really well. The other 2 did extremely poorly, dragging everything back down. Gene Sealers, another army who did just kind of poor across the board. They had 33% win rate, but 0 XOX1, so they struggled pretty much with every single one of their players. Votann, 35% win rate, 25% XOX1, so they had one player who did really well, but the rest of them were really struggling. And then you have like something like Eldari, 40% win rate, pretty average XOX1, above average representation. They're kind of down the bottom of everything. They're nothing to write home about, but I think they're just kind of sitting in that, like, everyone's just anticipating that new codex. They're waiting to get their hands on it, and I think you're going to see a huge change once that comes out because people have a lot of high expectations for it. People are really liking the preview, so we could see them jump up in the coming weeks once that finally gets released. Overall, everything else is looking fairly good. It's a nice even bar. You kind of want to look at the end of the chart and see where everything lines up. You have a few outliers at the top, but for the most part, everything is in that middle range there. So it's a low number of players. It's hard to get clean data from that just because it could be a little bit swingy, but overall everything looked pretty good for the week. No one stood out too much. Next, we're going to look at the tournament wins for each army last week. So at the top, Space Marines, another 2 tournament wins. They are kind of just continuously winning tournaments. Almost every week they're winning 1 or 2 different tournaments, so that's nice to see. It's been a while since they've had their kind of time in the sun. They're the sort of, the poster child, everyone says, but they usually don't have the sort of rules to back it. Everyone just takes other armies. Why would you take Space Marines when you can take Blood Angels? They're just Space Marines with more rules, same as Dark Angels, same as Space Wolves. But now they actually gave Space Marines some more unique identity, especially if you take like Rabute and you kind of like make that army that feels like their own army, and people are bringing them, and the top players are starting to play them, and they're seeing success and they're winning. So it's nice to see. I'm sure they'll get some nerfs because they're kind of winning a little bit too much, but for now I'm sure the Space Marine players are happy. And Tyranids getting their first tournament win of the Dataslate, and it's been 6 weeks, and it's a little odd for Tyranids. They're usually mid to top tier in tournament wins because they're a very highly represented army, a lot of people's favorite armies. A lot of people bring them, and they just usually you get a tournament win or 2 just because of the amount of players and the amount of good players who play them. But they have been kind of struggling to sort of bring home a win, but they finally got one, which is nice to see. And we're going to move on to the first faction focus, and this week is going to be Tyranids. So the first thing we're going to look at is the previous about 5 to 6 weeks of data. If we look at army rep, we can see what I'm talking about for the representation. On average, they're like 5.5%, 6%, so they're not twice as above the average, but they're quite a bit higher. This week they actually dipped down a little bit, only 4.7, but their win rate is the highest it's been in 8 weeks, so at 58%. So they had a good week this week. And then if you look down here at the sub-faction data, the most played one is the Invasion Fleet. Almost 51% of players, are playing Invasion Fleet. And then all the other ones are sitting around 5 to 15%, so kind of spread evenly. And if you look at the win percentage for the data slates, everything is kind of fairly balanced, around 50%. At the low end, you have a Synaptic Nexus at 39%, and you have Assimilation Swarm sitting at 61%. So you have, a couple little highs and lows there, but everything else is right around 50, 52%, which is nice to see. And if we look at their ranks out of 27, they're pretty much in the top 10 of everything. Good win percentage, high player count, good XOX1 percentage. Just the only thing they've really been struggling with is tournament wins, and they finally got one, so they're middle of the pack because they only have one win. But overall, they're in a pretty good spot. I think if people find those combos or those lists that sort of help them bring some tournament wins home, you could see them sort of jump up quite a bit. And if you look at their meta health rating, it's 110 out of 100, so they're about 10% above the average across all stats. Their win percentage is above average, army reps above average, XOX1 slightly above average. The only thing they're really like struggling in is tournament wins, so overall they're in a pretty good healthy spot. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have Leagues of Votann. So this is an army that's sort of doing a little bit worse, kind of struggling. And if we look at the last 5 weeks, army representation is normally, in the previous weeks before that, the end of the last data slate, right around average. And it just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. This week's only 1.3%. Even though the win rate sort of has been average to a little bit below average, this week it's kind of fallen right off at 35%. So they're an army who is kind of in a rough spot. You look at the army stats versus the meta average, below average win percentage, below average army rep, below average XOX1, no tournament wins. So they're just kind of doing meh. Overall, everything is just below where it should be, and that leads them to being about 20%. If you look at the meta health rating, it's 79 out of 100, so they're like 20% below the average across the board. So definitely an army that needs some help. No one's bringing the Grotmas Detachment. Look at the sub-faction data. Oathband is at 97% of players, so like one person has taken Hearthband, and that person didn't get any wins in the tournament because they have 0. They're not even showing up on the pie chart there. And if you look at the ranks out of 27, they're mid to lower half, so they don't have that identity they used to. From what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing from people, they feel like a Space Marine army. They don't feel like Votann did. They need to get to that spot where they give them the uniqueness and give those players something to look forward to and something to make them feel like their own specific army, give them some fun back. And I think you'll see the players come back, army rep will go up, and I think you'll start seeing some more consistent wins and maybe some tournament wins here and there, because they can be a really different army. They kind of play a little bit differently than a lot of other armies when they have their unique rules sort of set up, but they don't feel like they're in that spot right now. And now we're going to move on to the current data slate results. So this is 6 weeks of data, and like last week, everything is looking pretty green. At the top, you have Imperial Agents 54, you have Death Watch at 54. Those armies are a little misleading because Imperial Agents only has like 10 players over the whole data slate, so that number will swing wildly based off the results each week. Same as Death Watch, a pretty low count. Demons 53 is the first army that gets a lot of representation and is actually pretty high, and by high I mean just above average, so overall not too bad. Down at the bottom you've got the usual suspects: Chaos Knights, Black Templars, Adeptus Mechanicus. They're all below 45%, which is where GW likes to see an army's win rate live, 45 to 55%. Sisters of Battle is right on that line at 45, but realistically they're being propped up by like one good week at the start of the status slate where they were over 60% win rate, and then after that it's been abysmal, and every week it just keeps dropping and dropping. So they're definitely struggling. So there's 4 or 5 armies I think could use some love to help bring them back up into the fold, but there's no one running away with it. Even the best armies are just sitting at below 55%, so which is nice to see. Overall, the win percentage is nice and balanced. We'll kind of get into the I'll say the power of each army in the next slide when we look at tournament wins. So like I said, this is the tournament wins by week. So the graph shows each army and their tournament wins by each week. So each color is a different week in this data slate, and you can see sort of where the armies are getting their wins. And you look at Space Marines, they're getting 2 or 3 wins sort of each week. They're just winning constantly, which is the hallmark of an army who is, got that ability to take it home. They have a combo, or they have a unit or something that's just giving them the leg up on all those other armies. Because then you look at something like Orcs, where they have 6 wins, but they had 5 in 1 week. So they had a week where they just, for some reason, won everything, but then they haven't won anything since. So I don't know what caused that one specific week of results to sort of spike up, but that army has a high number of wins. It's kind of can be a little misleading to maybe the overall strength of the army. Demons, 7 tournament wins, 6 of them are with Legion of Excess. There's a lot going on, and I think players aren't used to it, and it's also very strong, so it's leading to a lot of wins. if they left it unnerfed, I think they would stop winning as many tournaments, but they would definitely be the best demon detachment there is, like they are now. Then you have the other top sort of 5. You've got Necrons and Chaos Space Marines, rounding that out. And at the bottom, you kind of have all the other armies with 1 or 2 or 3 wins. And then you still have 6 armies with no wins. You'd like to see some of those armies get at least a couple wins. Or you'd like to see some of the distribution at the top sort of spread back down. It's kind of turning into a data slate of have and have-nots. You can tell which armies actually have the ability to win, like that power or that combo or whatever it is that's giving them the edge to actually win a tournament. Because, we have majority of the tournament wins in the top 5. And then after that, it's just, here and there, armies picking out some wins or just armies getting no wins at all. So while the win percentage is nice and average across the board, you would like to see the tournament wins sort of spread evenly across the board, but we're seeing a huge discrepancy here. So this is definitely where you can kind of see where the top players are finding those rules, or finding those combos, or finding those interactions that are giving them the advantage over everyone else. And those are the things that might need to be adjusted. It'll help maybe smooth out some of these numbers here. All right, and the last one we're going to look at for the week is the meta health rating. So the meta health rating is a statistic I came up with that compares an army's results across the averages of all other armies. So if your army has a higher win percentage than the average, then their number is going to jump up a little bit. If it has a lower win percentage, the number is going to drop down a little bit. And this compares army rep, win percentage, XOX1, and tournament wins. And now the bar in green, or the green section, is 100, where that's the average should be. So everyone should be right around that green bar. So we can see that the numbers at the top, you have Space Marines, Necrons, and Chaos Demons. They're all about 130, so they're on average probably doing about 30% better. In around that, it's not quite that much, but 30% better than the average across all their stats. And then at the other end, you have Black Templars and Chaos Knights sitting below 75. So they're doing like 25% below the average across the board. So this is a way to see like what armies are consistently doing good across all categories and what armies are consistently doing poor. Now you're going to get some armies that are always going to be around 100 or above just because of like something like army representation. Things like Necrons, Orcs, Space Marines, no matter how the army's doing win percentage wise, they are always getting a lot of people playing them because they're very popular armies. So they're going to have some inflated numbers due to the army representation being higher, but they're going to be dragged down by the other numbers. Like normally Space Marines aren't near the top at 132 because they usually don't win a lot of tournaments, and they usually don't have a very high XOX1 percentage because they get dragged down by all the new players. For every good player that plays a Space Marine, you have a person who's new to the hobby who just played Space Marine 2 or who just watched Secret Level, and they just see that and they go, oh, that's cool, and they go in, they buy the intro box, and guess what, it's got a Space Marine in it who's not going to play the Space Marine. That's pretty cool. So and those guys just they get rolled over in a tournament. It's their first tournament, they're excited, but they're dragging those numbers down. Same as Orcs. Orcs are a fun army. They have a lot of cool interactions. They lend really well to people having fun and playing them. So for every competitive Orc player, you're going to get a guy bringing a Stompa to the tournament who's going to drag those numbers down. So when you see armies like that sort of sitting as high as they are, especially Space Marines at 132, there could be probably some problems where they're still succeeding despite the new players and despite the struggles that kind of inherently come with that army. Necrons are always a good army. They usually have pretty good rules interactions, and they're popular. Undead space robots is always a cool faction. Demons is surprisingly up high, mostly because Legions of Excess, giving them those 7 tournament wins. That's propping their numbers up. Down the bottom, like I said, you've got Knights and Black Templars. Black Templars are always struggle due to representation. They always drag them down a little bit. Knights are just sitting really low across the board. They're in a rough spot. Same as Votann, same as Sisters. All those armies definitely need some loves. We want to get everyone back up right around 100. As this data slate is kind of going on, these numbers are kind of going up on the top end and down on the low end. It was a little bit closer, so ideally we can see some adjustments and we can kind of bring everyone back around 100. Now that's not going to happen. It's never going to be perfectly balanced, but I think if you can get within like everyone between like 85 and 115, that means you won't have too many armies running away with too many categories overall, and that'll give a better overall balance when you combine all factors together. Alright guys, thanks for watching. That's it for this week. I really hope you liked it. If you did like it, make sure to give the video a like, so it helps push it out there for more people to see. If you really liked it and want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. It helps support me, support the channel, and I'll make sure you get all the latest videos when I post them every week. Thanks guys, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you next week.